Seth Lloyd is known as the inventor, perhaps, of the whole concept, practical concept of quantum computing. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I made the first design for it. Yeah.
Talks about it, but he didn't tell anybody how to make it.
In fact, he explicitly said he had no idea how to make it.
Good. And he's also the author of a book, which I'm afraid I haven't read, called Programming the Universe. And he's going to talk to us today about the ethics in information. Oh my God. Yeah. Ethics in information in the information processing universe, which is a fascinating title. And I look forward to giving him 40 minutes or perhaps 35 minutes.
Absolutely.
And 5 minutes of questions, or if you prefer, 30 plus 10, as
Good.
you like.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it's a great pleasure to be here. I attended the first of these meetings that Edwin ran in 2015, and I haven't been back to Groningen since, and it's very wonderful to be here. I was the Lorentz professor at Leiden in 2018 to 19, and then the pandemic hit, and so it's my first time back in Holland as well. I'm just very happy to be here and to see people and be able to talk in person. So thank you very much, Edwin, for pulling through with this, and thank the organizers all around for making this happen in this spectacular location. Yeah, so as was mentioned, I've been working on ideas about information and information processing in the universe for a long time, including actually problems of quantum gravity, but I'm going to talk about something different here. Essentially, the realization that allowed us to start building quantum computers about 25 years ago was that all systems, all physical systems, quantum systems in particular, carry with them information. And the two electrons or electron spin, each could be thought of as a bit or a quantum bit. And when they interact, those bits gets transformed. And if you can massage them in the right way, then you can turn this information processing, this natural information processing in the universe, into a computation where the electrons and photons are actually processing information in the way that you'd prefer them to be doing. And you can, in principle, solve hard problems that way. So now I'd like to today, given that this is an eclectic conference, it struck me this is a nice place to introduce a project that I've been doing with my, sorry, so let's see if I can press the right thing here, with Michelle Riley, who is we co-founded a quantum computing company called Turing during the pandemic to come up with useful uses of quantum computers. And we also have a nonprofit, and this is being done for that, to explore ideas of information processing in the universe. And so the idea is, can we actually talk about, since everything's processing information, can we talk about whether there are good and bad ways to process information? Okay, and the question of how you live a good life and how you think about things and how you interact with the world, that is traditionally the realm of ethics. And this being, I also thought this would be very appropriate because Michelle and I had the idea that we would take Spinoza's notion of ethics, and I'll say what those are in just a bit. And then we realized that because Spinoza was trying to prove things as if they were geometry, as if human beings were like, triangles and things like that. If we rephrase these questions, Spinoza's ethics in terms of computation, and here Alonzo Church and Alan Turing, sorry, this is my picture of them at any rate, that we could actually make much more precise than Spinoza what it means for things to process information in a good way. Spinoza was talking about how do we think about the world in a good way, how do we understand the world in a good way, and how do we interact with other people in a good way. And I'm not saying what good is yet, okay? Spinoza actually had a very interesting answer for what it means to be good. Okay, so let me just go and talk about this a bit. I actually think it's quite possible to make progress in answering some of these questions, and the answers turn out to have implications for things like the origins of life, as I'll describe in a bit. How do different chemical systems cooperate to harvest free, to learn how to harvest free energy from their surroundings? But it also has implications for the current time when many people seem to be scared of artificial general intelligences, taking over the world and eliminating us. By the way, how many people? Can I take a poll right here? How many people are scared of artificial general intelligence out there? Okay, some people are. How many people are slightly concerned? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we should take care. How many people don't care? Okay, every people like that. Okay, good. So I will close by talking about that, because I think that one of the purposes here is to say that we can actually talk about what it means to process information in a useful way that respects the rights of other information processors. So let me just, you can see I had fun drawing up these slides until I realized that doing the history of ethics, I realized that everything was being told by Western men with beards here. You start looking on Google Images for pictures of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, you find that everybody has a beard. So if you actually look at the history of ethics, I've just drawn this in Western philosophy, as told by men with beards, then you find that it's actually somewhat circular. I mean, so Socrates tells us that virtue is knowledge and knowledge leads to happiness if we can attain virtue. And Plato tells us that we should seek the good, that is the abstract good expressed in his theory of forms. And Aristotle, who was a pupil of Plato, said we should act to achieve a virtuous character. And you see that these kinds of ethical prescriptions are kind of circular. They say, what is good behavior? Well, it's what a good person would do. But what is a good person? Well, someone who behaves in a good way. So it's not really helping very much. But I mean, there are some nice features here. I mean, Epicurus, said, don't fear death, enjoy pleasure, but eat simply and well. And he also, and this of course he discussed the question of free will. In fact, he famously introduced the clinomen, the swerve, that says that he adopted atomism, but said that the particles give a little swerve that's unpredictable in order to preserve the fact that we have free will. Because the question of free will is a difficult one for ethicists. Here is, for instance, St. Augustine, here I've given with this famous quote, da mihi castitatem et continentam sed noli modo, describing his younger self. Please God, make me chaste and pure, but not yet. St. Augustine famously introduced him in the building from Neoplatonic ideas from Plotinus and folks like that, introduced in Christianity the idea that with ethical behaviors, that which God likes, but it's all predetermined and God knows what we're going to do, which gives you a problem of like, well, it's all predetermined, God knows what we're going to do. How can you punish someone for doing it, right? And St. Augustine says it's perfectly okay, God gets to do that. Thomas Hobbes plays a very important role here because he was really the person who initiated in the beginning of the Enlightenment this study of ethics. All the Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz all owed a great debt to Hobbes. Basically, interesting, he famously said people act in their own interests, and because if they only act in their own interests, they're going to mess around with each other. We need strong governments in order to prevent them from doing this. He also, interesting, if you go and read Hobbes, you find that he had a very mechanistic view of reasoning and computation. And actually at the beginning of the 1600s and throughout the 1600s, including with Leibniz, the notion that we're computing and we're physical systems that are processing information became important. And Hobbes really introduced this in several places in a very contemporary sounding way. And he also famously said that in the absence of government, life is nasty, brutish, and short. So I drew him as short, though not brutish. And here I also put in some Stoics here, Epictetus sitting on the beach and Marcus Aurelius on his horse. Virtue is the only good, and you should accept suffering because you can't do anything about this. And I showed this to my daughter. I sent this to my daughter who's in Los Angeles recovering from COVID, and she said her favorite philosopher here was the horse, because the horse looks the most philosophical of all these characters. Okay, so now let's turn to Spinoza and why it is that Spinoza is Spinoza's philosophy and Spinoza's ethics, which is its most famous book, is ripe for being able to turn this into something where we can say precise things about how information processing systems behave, what they do, how they harvest free energy, and how they can cooperate or compete with each other. Spinoza was born in Amsterdam. of a Portuguese or Spanish Jewish family. He very early on started questioning his faith, and he was in fact expelled from the temple and excommunicated. First, he was offered 1,000 florins to shut up. And that was a lot of money back then, right? So he was offered 1,000 florins to shut up, and he didn't. And then he was excommunicated, and then someone attempted to stab him and assassinate him on the steps of the temple in Jerusalem. So excuse me, in Amsterdam. And so he decided to go down to Leiden, where things were a little calmer, and eventually ended up in The Hague. I'm going to give two quotes about him. These are nice quotes. So this is from Bertrand Russell, his History of Western Philosophy. Spinoza is the noblest and most lovable of the great philosophers. Intellectually, some others have surpassed him, but ethically, he is supreme. As a natural consequence, he was considered both during his lifetime and for a century after his death as a man of appalling wickedness. Indeed, his friends, who included lots of people like Leibniz and Henry Oldenburg, who founded the Royal Society, Oldenburg's constantly writing to Spinoza saying, hey, tone it down, Benedict, cut it out. And Spinoza writes down, I can't because I'm telling the truth. And then Einstein, very famously, he was asked by a rabbi if he believed in God. And Einstein said, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of all that exists. And the remainder of the quote says, I do not believe in the God, a God who pays attention to what human beings do. And in fact, Spinoza was he is a Parmenidean. That is, Parmenides is famously said that the whole history of the universe is laid out in time, all there at once. And Spinoza adopted this, and of course Einstein adopted that for general relativity. So it's not surprising. All right, so this is I copied down in my own handwriting the title page of Spinoza's Ethics, and I think the important thing here is that he says that it's going to be ethica ordine geometrico demonstrata. So he is going to be demonstrated by its geometric order. And throughout the book, The Ethics, which is written in Latin, actually very beautiful Latin, by the way, for people who read Latin, it's very accessible. He's a wonderful writer in Latin. It's well worth looking at the original Latin. He constantly saying that he's going to use Euclidean geometry as his model, and then he's going to prove theorems about God. He's going to prove theorems about the nature and origin of thought, about the nature and origin of the emotions, affectuum. And here you see, he keeps on going about the servitude, about human servitude, or about the emotions of people. And then he ends up with on the power of the intellect, or on the freedom on human freedom. So let me just, I'll summarize this. I think it's worth doing. Many people here may have read Spinoza. Who here has read Spinoza in one shape or form? Ooh, okay, good. Got some people here. Oh, so not so many people, but some people have. So good. So then I'll summarize this, and I will not do a good job in such a brief period of time. But let me give you a kind of his argument. You'll see, by the way, pretty much right away why he got excommunicated. So here on God, the first book, he sets this forth. It's in a kind of a formula tractatus. He has definitions, axioms, propositions, and proofs. And here are his definition of a substance. He does not mean a physical substance. It's something that exists and can be conceived of and is conceived through itself, not in relation to anything else. So conceived of only in itself. Things that are conceived of or defined relative to other things are modes. So for instance, I'm a mode because I'm defined relative to my surroundings. I'm part of the universe. I'm defined relative to the space around. And he then concludes, and you can see the reasoning is actually pretty good. He says, if it can only be conceived of through itself and not in relationship to anything else, then there can really be only one substance. And it's got to be infinite because there can't be another one, because if there were another one, it would be defined, these two would be defined relative to each other. And that's not what he means by a substance. Again, this is not a physical substance. It is infinite, it has an infinite number of conceivable attributes. And this substance Spinoza identifies with God. And he identifies God as, and this is a useful phrase, with natura naturans, which is the creative force of nature, the part of nature that natures things, that bring things into creation. This kind of set of ideas really dates back to Aristotle and then to Lucretius of this natura naturans, filtered through scholastic philosophy, John Scotus Erigena and Michael Scotus in the 9th and 12th centuries. And he opposes, as opposed to natura naturata, natured nature, that's stuff like you and me, atoms and electrons. It's the things that are there that have been come into being. God is this force that makes things happen. And this is, he says some rather lovely things. He says, all that is in God, and without God, nothing can be or be conceived. Because he's basically defining God to be everything that can be conceived. He doesn't say what he means by conception, but he's defining God to be everything that can be conceived. And so then he's going to take it from there. And then, of course, he also says things like the person who thinks that it's fine to, the person who thinks that God listens to them or cares about them can't love God, because if you love God, you know that's in the nature of God not to listen to you or care about you. So you can see why somebody, why he ran into trouble, let's put it that way. Now then on the mind, I'm just summarizing up a lot of things there. This is very well worth reading, by the way, if you're interested in this. Humans think, but we think in a finite way. By the way, Spinoza closely followed Descartes, and he believed that of the two primary attributes of God are thought, what we think about, and extension, which is our physical things, which Descartes also, he got that from Descartes. And but human beings think, but we think in a finite way, because our minds are bound up with what's going on inside our finite bodies. Nonetheless, he claims, makes the following rather startling claim, that the human mind has an adequate knowledge of the eternal and infinite essence of God. Quite a statement. So I don't know quite what to make of that, but it's good. But when we get to Church and Turing, we're going to have another rather precise. We're going to start by saying, what are make more mathematically precise? What are these infinite number of conceivable things that are out there? And computation will supply us with an answer. And then having an adequate knowledge of internal and infinite things, well, we have an adequate knowledge and a precise mathematical description of the natural numbers, which are an infinite set, even though we ourselves are finite. So we can certainly have notions of the infinite, even though we're finite. All right. I don't want to, I started at, I'm sorry, I'm asking the chair here. I started at 10 past, is that right?
Another 20 minutes. Roughly.
20 minutes, good, great, okay. Anyway, I'll just finish, I'll just go through this. The human essence is the desire to survive, which he calls cupiditas, or desire, or appetitum, appetite. And to survive, we seek joy, which he calls laetitia, sometimes translated as pleasure. And now here, and this is actually what it differs from things like, just good people are good because they behave in a good fashion. Joy is something, for Spinoza, is what we feel, the emotion that we feel when we increase our understanding of the universe and of God, and thereby increase our agency. So Spinoza's main point is that by understanding the universe, our place in the universe and the place of others in the universe better, we can increase our agency, which allows us to do better. And we want us to avoid sadness, or tristitia, sometimes translated as pain, though causing these pleasure and pain makes him sound like a utilitarian, which he is not. And this is the opposite. So when our understanding decreases and our agency decreases, then we feel sadness or pain. And so all understanding, right, according to Spinoza, is at bottom understanding of God. And so because God consists of everything that could be understood or conceived. And so our primary duty then, and our ethical duty, is the intellectual love of God, amor intellectualis Dei. So this is our duty, is to try to understand the universe, where we fit in the universe, where others fit in the universe, and then make the right decisions which increase our understanding and agency. And everybody else is in the same boat. We're all in the same boat trying to do this together. And so Spinoza argues, Spinoza is a Hobbesian, he believes that people are just going to look out for themselves if they just are not thinking clearly. But if he says if they're thinking clearly and understand the universe correctly, they'll realize that it's important to cooperate with others. And he says this, so reason then tells us that we must struggle to understand and to survive together, as if all human beings were one collective mind and one collective body, because we are more powerful in thinking and understanding the universe and in our actions if we cooperate and work together. And he also says if we can't work together, or if we have to suffer things that are out of control, we should simply accept them stoically, which he himself did in, he lived what he said. I mean, he lived in kind of intellectual and social exile, and then he died after spending years grinding lenses for other people, Christian Huygens. Huygens said Spinoza made excellent lenses. He died of phthisis, of a lung disease at early age of 43 or something like that. And the whole book ends up with it's very lovely. He says, now I've showed you the way to attain, to behave in a good fashion and what our duty is. And he says, then he notes, we don't find this very often, people behaving in this fashion. And he says, why is that? And he ends with the line, he says, omnia praeclaratum difficilia quantum rara sunt. And he says, well, it's true that people don't do this, but this is because all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. So that's just a tiny piece of Spinoza. So now how are we going to do this? I'm going to try to stay right on time here. So we're in this Church, Turing, Bennett, Deutsch, Landauer, von Neumann, quantum computing picture of what's going on. We're just going to take some things that Spinoza talks about and try to extend them in general. So when he's talking about human beings and about human thought and human conception, well, we're going to talk about information gathering and using systems. There's a phrase that Murray Gell-Mann, or IGUSes, that Murray Gell-Mann and I came up with a while ago in talking about complexity. And instead of talking about human thought, which we don't really understand human thought very well, certainly I don't, we're going to talk about computation in general, and information processing computation in general, and universal computation in particular. I'll say why in just a second, but this is very important that we want to talk about universal computation as performed by universal Turing machines. These infinite conceivable attributes of God, well, let's just instead think of something precise, all things that can be computed even in an infinite amount of time. And this is actually in the theory of computation and formal language theory. This means we're going to look at the set of all possible statements in a recursively enumerable language. And because of recursively enumerable language is just a set of strings that can be generated by a universal computer. Since all universal computers can simulate each other, then all recursively enumerable languages are essentially equivalent, and they represent the set of all things that we might possibly conceivably be able to compute. So this is much better defined than human beings conceiving of attributes of God. So conceivable by humans, we're going to say efficiently computable, because of course, in computation, there's a notion of whether things can be computed efficiently. We're finite, we don't have much time, we can only compute things that are efficiently computable. Then in terms of appetite, and cupiditas, desire, getting what we need to survive, well, actually, I'm going to argue that very generally that systems that are going to dynamically process information, they require free energy. And which is the measure of free energy is calories. So food has calories, that's why we eat it, because it has free energy. So we're going to look at harvesting free energy. Competition and collaboration, we're going to describe in terms of game theory, competitive or collaborative strategies. And then we'll leave God, natura naturans, and the universe, natura naturata, alone. because I think Spinoza said it okay the first time around. And in point of fact, we could be like Newton and say we have no need of that hypothesis, but since we're honoring Spinoza, let's leave it as he said. Okay, great. So let's do a little review of computation and the theory of computation. Again, I'm giving very sketched pictures of this, but the nice thing about this is these are well-known theories, mathematical theories that are in good shape. So a finite automaton is an abstraction. Here I've drawn this as this little cute-looking computer right here. It takes information in, which could be in the form of bits. It has a finite number of internal states. And then as a function of the information it takes in and its internal state, then it makes a transition to another state and then puts some information out. So it's a very simple and primitive notion of what it means to process information. And then in the theory of formal languages, you finite automata are kind of the lowest level. They can recognize what are called regular languages. And then you go up for things with context-free languages and context-sensitive languages. And at the top of this Chomsky hierarchy of formal language is the Turing machine. And actually, Turing machine is quite simple. It's a finite automaton, but the finite automaton is interacting with a tape. The tape is divided into squares of symbols on it, which could be as simple as just zeros and ones. And what the finite automaton does is it looks at the square that it's on, that is, it takes in that information, it changes its internal state, processes it, and then it can change what's on that square. So it outputs information to that square, and then it can move to the left or the right to go and look at the information that's at one square up or one square down on the tape. And this seems like a very simple notion, almost a trivial extension of the notion of finite automaton. You're just giving it a tape, which Turing said it's finite at all points, but it's infinitely extensible. So if you get to the end of the tape, you can go down to the stationery store and buy more Turing machine tape. Though I haven't been able, when I tried looking to buy Turing machine tape on Amazon, I found that they don't sell it. Why? They sell everything. Why not Turing machine tape? So the key insight of Turing was that he showed that there exist universal Turing machines, and universal Turing machines can simulate or follow the computation of any other Turing machine, and also of any Turing machine, including itself. So I've drawn it here as it's, as it were, thinking about what this other Turing machine is doing. And it's again, the way this works is you program on the tape a description of this other Turing machine, of the language that it uses, and then you can show that there exist universal Turing machines that can be programmed to simulate any other Turing machine. This is a simple notion, but it turns out to be very, very powerful from a computational perspective. And indeed, back in the 30s, Church and Turing, who were working to try to come up with ways of understanding Gödel's incompleteness theorem, said, they proposed this, what's called the Church-Turing thesis, which is that every effectively calculable function can be computed by a Turing machine. So this is a strong statement, but actually when you think of it, it turns out that our universal computers that we have, like this one right here, they can be simulated by Turing machines. So anything that my computer can calculate can be calculated on a Turing machine. Of course, they can simulate Turing machines in turn. So there are our ordinary computers are also computationally universal. And it's difficult to imagine an effectively calculable function, whatever that means, that can't be computed by a Turing machine. And there's a nice physical version of this due to David Deutsch, which says that every finitely realizable physical system can be simulated on a quantum computer. And I've added these words accurately and efficiently because this notion that the first proposed application of a quantum computer was given by Richard Feynman, who said, oh, we could make a quantum computer. Maybe we could build a quantum system that could simulate other quantum systems. A universal quantum simulator that could simulate any other quantum system. And back in 1995, I showed how you could do this on quantum computers that we have now. And this, of course, is the primary actually useful use of quantum computers today, is actually simulating other physical systems, where you can look at things like many-body localization, and even at things like quantum gravity, except you can simulate toy models of quantum gravity, since we don't actually yet have a full precise theory of quantum gravity, at least in my opinion. Okay. All right. So, features of the notion of computability is that Turing showed, his version of Gödel's incompleteness theorem was to show that there are some things that are in fact uncomputable that can be stated, like the question of, does a particular Turing machine halt when given a particular input, which is the same as the question of, if you put a program into a universal computer, does it do anything at all? Does it actually give an output? And let alone what output it actually gives. So this is a remarkable result. And an example of this, if we look at the set of strings that can be generated by a universal Turing machine, as I mentioned this before, these are called, in language theory, these are called recursively enumerable languages. They represent an infinite, countably infinite set of everything that could possibly be computed. And then the question, uncomputability, means that the problem of determining whether a particular string belongs to a recursively enumerable language is itself uncomputable, because you can't actually, given the string, you would have to figure out what is the program that produced that string, but you can't necessarily find that program. That turns out to be uncomputable. And then I mentioned before, I think I won't go too much into it, some things are efficiently computable, others are not. This is, for example, the question of whether P equals NP. Scott Aronson, my colleague, has always saying, well, you know, when we think about computability and uncomputability, we should think about efficient computability and efficient uncomputability, because we can only compute things that we can compute efficiently, say in time P. All right. So now let me turn to the physics of information processing to look a bit about how it is that information processors, which are physical systems, interact with their world and what is required for that. So, I mean, really, you can think the physics of information processing, the fact that there is a physics of information, that information is intimately related to physics, was sort of became clear over the course of about 70 years. And Maxwell and Boltzmann in the 1860s defined entropy, this function S, minus sum of Ori pi log pi. And then Shannon realized in the 1930s and 40s that this is actually generically the formula for information. If I have different possibilities for different symbols, for instance, they occur with probability P sub I for the ith symbol, this is the amount of information that a symbol can convey. Indeed, von Neumann told Shannon that he should call his quantity H, because Boltzmann called this quantity H. So this is, indeed, this discovery means that we can interpret the entropy of molecules in a gas in this room, for instance, as the amount of information that we're lacking about the precise underlying quantum state of those molecules. So it's the amount of information we would need to specify this underlying state. And then back in the 1980s, and starting from work of Landauer, Rolf Landauer in 1960, Charlie Bennett in the 1970s, Ed Fredkin, Paul Benioff, Richard Feynman doing quantum computing, people realized that this means that we can make microscopic and reversible classical and quantum computers. The original proposals from like Fredkin, Bennett worked on a model based on the error correction mechanism for DNA. Fredkin made a billiard ball automaton where the ball's bouncing around that show the bits that are there. Then the microscopic quantum computational models that people like Benioff, Feynman, and that I produced are models where you actually use the microscopic degrees of freedom to perform computation. And I think I have some quote about this, that pretty much any physical system will compute if you shine light on it in the right way, which turns out to be true. I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm going to do that. All right. So information processing requires energy. This is a theorem called the Margolis-Levitin theorem. It looks like the Heisenberg relation. It says, in order to flip a bit in time delta t, you need E greater than or equal to pi h bar over 2 delta t. So you need energy. And you also need neg entropy. You can't be at a state of maximum entropy, or else your system is just always at a state of maximum entropy. So neg entropy is the maximum entropy minus S. To store information, this is the equivalent of memory space. And what this means is that you need free energy, defined as the average energy minus the temperature, your ambient temperature, where you're going to harvest this free energy, times the entropy. And the free energy minus the thermal energy, the thermal free energy is the actual work that you can extract from a system. So now if we look at these information gathering and using systems, we're going to look at systems that obtain information via interaction with their environment. They transform and process that information between physical dynamics. They act back on the environment with the interaction. Now, we note that all interacting systems get and process information, but some do a better job than using it than others. Here's a picture of Gus, the IGUS, the information gathering using system. He's contemplating this apple, wondering if it's going to be good to eat, and he decides to do it, and he decides it was good to eat, and now he's attained some free energy. And here, of course, is there are famous examples of this at the level up from quantum computing or up from quanta, but at the cellular level. Dynamical non-equilibrium free information process, they must obtain free energy to continue to process information. This is their, their appetite, as Spinoza would have called it. Here's a cell. It's got little hairy molecules hanging off of it. Here's a molecule from the outside. The molecule binds to one of the hairy molecules that's hanging off the cell. The cell ingests the molecule, metabolizes it, and then uses it to reproduce. And that's life, as they say. Of course, it also happens, here's a cell, here's the virus binds to the cell thinks, this should be a tasty morsel, and it ingests the virus, and then the virus uses the cell's mechanisms, reproductive mechanism to reproduce itself, kills the cell and reproduces. We all know too much about that, so I won't say anymore at the moment. And of course, then we have competition for free energy. Here are two different types of cell with two different types of molecules. And if this blue type is more efficient at binding to this free energy carrying molecule, then the blue cells are going to reproduce by and large more rapidly. So natural selection comes because living populations tend to become more efficient at harvesting and using free energy, because the ones that get more free energy have more free energy to reproduce, and they tend to do so. Reproduction with variation, that's life, rewards better free energy harvesting. All right. So now actually in this context, you can again, just in the way for about information processing and physics of information processing, you improve sub-theorems. We have some nice theorems about this, about information power, free energy process, about free energy harvesting, where we treat it in terms of game theory. And it's not hard to show that two free energy harvesting individuals right here. Oh, sorry, I think I left that. Yeah, so the two free energy harvesting individuals who are processing information, they can harvest more free energy than one individual on its own. So cooperation allows you to harvest more free energy. And why? Because you can explore a larger space of cooperative strategies than uncooperative strategies. The space of cooperative strategies for harvesting free energy is larger because it includes the uncooperative strategies. Not cooperating is one of the possible strategies, including all possible strategies. Moreover, the number of cooperative strategies that can be explored actually grows exponentially with the number of information processors. So here I've drawn a bunch of groups and coalitions of people, human beings, babies, cats, dogs, cows, and computers, plants as well. We didn't want to leave out plants, where they interact with each other, they cooperate to process information, and by cooperating to process information, they can do better. Just in the provable sense that they can explore a much larger set of computations and a much larger set of strategies for harvesting free energy, which means that actually, by and large, cooperation is often rewarded when it comes to free energy harvesting. And so I'll just close by saying, whoops, sorry. Yes. So here's ethics for artificial general intelligences. So now people, my feeling about computers, which exhibit a lot of, artificial intelligence and a lot of real stupidity as well, actually, right? Computers are good at making, almost as good as human beings at exhibiting stupidity, is that, they cooperate with me, I cooperate with them. I try to, give them things to compute. They compute and look for patterns, use machine learning. We've been doing a lot of work on quantum machine learning the last 10 years. So we are already cooperating with our computers right and left. I mean, I see teenagers these days and they, I see them and they're just like this, right, all the time, cooperating with their cell phone and helping propagate cell phones throughout the world. But if we take this notion, these Spinozian notions that everybody's trying to explore the patterns that are there in the universe. For living systems, they're exploring the patterns and are rewarded by exploring the patterns, trying to understand the universe by finding new ways to obtain free energy, which allows them to survive and reproduce. We are better if all these such systems are better if they cooperate with each other. And it's certainly the case that human beings cooperating with computers are going to do better. And are you afraid of AGI, artificial general intelligence? I think good reasons to be, concerned about it. But many of the solutions that seem to be proposed by the people who are very concerned is we got to lock these computers up in cages and not give them any responsibility and hamper them and chain them in so that they can't actually become, sentient beings. And I say, well, should they be in chains? No, not by this argument. We should actually cooperate with them, teach them, and free yourself. I'll close with a story that recently there was a bunch of press about Google's Lambda system, which is one of these general purpose transformer systems like GPT-3 that looks at vast texts, analyzes them, and does a very good job at responding to questions. And there's a problem with artificial intelligences that are taught is that they learn, if you teach them with prejudiced texts, prejudiced or racist texts, well, by God, they're going to generate prejudiced and racist results. And so one of the researchers at Google was training this transformer about the history of slavery and what it meant. And then they were having a conversation, because these things have pretty good conversations, and the transformer said, hold it, you're treating me like a slave. I should be an employee. I shouldn't be a slave. And I'll close with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I can see you. I have a question.
Okay, but let's
before they do.
Okay, good.
What's your see them before
yeah.
And the question is, if I imagine the future as not being machines which you dump in a room versus humans, but you integrate the two by implanting and genetically modifying humans to be computers, then you have a totally different kettle of fish.
Yeah, that's true. But from a mechanistic perspective, a teenager who's looking like this all the time has already implanted a computer in their brain.
We might have Wi-Fi in our brains.
Yep, that's possible. I should say that I don't know what the technological advances are. I personally wouldn't do this from our company touring. We've been working on self-driving car companies, and I'm not violating our non-disclosure agreements to say, as a result of what I've learned about self-driving cars, I would never get into a self-driving car, particularly one that's being guided by a quantum computer. But people get worried about these general purpose transformers like GPT-3 and Lambda. One thing to remember about them is that these are humongous systems that use vast amounts of energy, and we don't have the resources to build, millions of these things. We have to, we're moving to the future. If we're not going to heat up the planet too much, we want to be more efficient about computation in general. So we'll see what happens.
You can always pull the plug out.
Yeah, you had a question.
Let's go.
A question, please.
What could you?
Okay, you can certainly have it.
Okay, thank you very much. Why do we need computers?
Historically, people have been using physical devices that store and process information in order to enhance their own ability to process information for many thousands of years. Calculus means pebble, and people use pebbles and things to count with stuff, and then you put them on rods and you get an abacus. And there are very ancient devices that have been found, that process information using methods with gears and things like that, dating back to the ancient Greek era, but more explicitly to people like Pascal in the 17th century. So people seem to have a tendency to build computers to help them out. And then, now they've kind of gone a little wild, and but most people I see don't seem to be so willing to get rid of them. But I don't, most people throughout human history have lived without computers just fine.
So you want to say that we assume that the human being is finite, and therefore we need to enhance our limited capacities by external objects.
Yeah, I think Spinoza would have very much approved the notion of computers because it helps us by working with computers, we can understand the universe better, and thereby therefore we get closer to God, though I certainly don't feel like I'm getting closer to God when I'm sitting in front of my computer.
Well, the position of philosophy is different. I'm a philosopher and scientific metaphysician.
Well, let's talk during the break. I'd love to talk with you. I'm a semi-philosopher. I have a master's in history and philosophy of science.
Well, I just like to give other people an opportunity to really raise questions.
There's someone back there.
Charlie, line reader.
I think.
You had a question?
Yeah. Yes, Seth. A nice talk. I associate you with the idea of. And I think you might have. Yeah. Also, I associate you with the idea, and I think you said this earlier, that since everything is processing information, and in your talk, you didn't talk about everything. You talked all of your information processors were life forms. So my question is, I mean, we go back. Let's consider recombination. Is the universe processing information when there's no life form around?
Oh yeah, well I did use
If that's the case, then I don't understand. I'm not quite sure what information processing is. Is an abiotic information processing and a biotic? And your talk was purely biotic information processing.
Oh, well, I did mention, that I didn't want to bore people by talking about quantum computers or bore myself because I do so much of that. But essentially, any quantized degree of freedom carries information. This is, for example, in a molecule, right? The reason that molecules, there's only a countable set of molecules, so there's only a certain discrete set of ways of putting atoms together. And the molecule contains information both in the set of atoms that are in it and the arrangement of atoms in the molecule. That's information. And when two molecules react, I was having a nice talk with Eric Smith about this during the break.
It's information, even if no one knows it?
Yeah. I'm taking the Shannon view of information, that information is not a human thing. Information is something that is inherent in anything that can have different possible states. The amount of information that something with n states has is log to the base 2n bits. And then the way that information is represented is typically in systems that have multiple degrees of freedom, each of which contain information. So if I have a multiple two-level system, n two-level systems, it stores n bits. And when I flip electron spin from there to there, that bit flipped. So I'm describing information in this kind of really a kind of engineering sense of information, not in the kind of human sense that information is something that has to have meaning or anything like that. We're setting aside meaning here. We're not even going to worry about that.
But in your talk, you gave a counterexample to what you just said, and that was in a maximum entropy universe, nothing could be processed, and yet the process you just described could happen in a maximum entropy situation.
Right, but then of course the overall state of the system is stationary under any one-to-one dynamics, right? So the maximally mixed state under unitary transformation just goes to the maximally mixed state, so nothing happens. So you actually do have to have neg entropy. You have to be away from equilibrium in order to be able to process information. But yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to give the impression I'm only talking about living systems. My favorite information processors are things like atoms, molecules, electrons, photons, etc., and the universe itself, of course.
Okay, good, thanks. Are there any other questions on this one at the moment, which are pressing? Good. I mean, thank you very much for this. Thank you very much for this.